Now then, let's just think about the vertical alignment for this table row. Just like we did before, I want to specify vertical alignment top. So let's select the TR element down here, select tag, and then in the properties window, we can hopefully set the V-align to be top. Okay, what's next? Next up, we want to add a result label in here. So let's select the table row. And then once we've selected the table row, we can merge the cells so that we have one big cell that spans 5 columns. And then in there, I'm going to drag a label control, an ASP label. And we'll set some properties in there. Let's set the ID to be result label. Oh, let's also set the text. We'll set the text to be result will be displayed here. Okay, now if I wanted to, I could right click on that control and I could set the styles. So I'll just click there. And this is the style builder dialog box that we saw earlier when we looked at HTML controls. And I could use the same approach if I wanted to here to set the visual appearance for my web control. And that's fine. I'm not going to do that. I'll cancel the window. And instead, we'll come back to the properties window in the bottom corner. And you can see that we have higher level controls that you can set individually. So this gives you a richer programming model. You don't have to set styles at the HTML level. What we're doing here is we're setting properties on a .NET class, and it will in turn render the appropriate style attribute in the HTML when it gets returned back to the browser. So for example, let's set the background color to be a web color. We'll go for, let me see, dark orange appeals to me. And we'll set the font properties. We'll set the foreground color for the font to be, oh, how about maroon? Could work. And finally, on the font item, we'll set the font names to be, well, let's choose some fonts. We can choose Arial as our preferred font, and then I'll press enter. And then we could choose Verdana as our next preferred font. And then finally, we could choose Sans Serif as the fallback font. I'll click OK. So that's a different way for setting attributes on the ASP label. We use high-level properties instead of setting the low-level styles like we did with the HTML control. Very good. Last thing we need to do is to add a button. So let's add a button onto our web page and drag it there. We'll set the ID of the button to be submit button. And we'll set the text to be submit. Okay, and we're done. Now then, let's think about how we're going to handle the click event on this button. If you recall how we handled it on the HTML button, we had to manually go into the source view, and then we had to add in here the on server click event, and we had to manually then go into the code, type in a method with the correct signature, and that was quite a time-consuming, error-prone process. We don't need to do any of that when we're using web controls. Because it's a web control, it has a high-level event that I can access via the property window. So let's just do that. Let's go back to the design view, click our button, and then over in the property window, here's our lightning bolt, which shows the events for the control. Now, you can handle any of these events if you want to. Most often, you'll just handle the click event. If you double-click on the event name, it will add a method with a default name, such as submit button _ click. So let's do that. I'm going to double-click on the event name, and it's added the event handler method here. So all we need to do now is to write some code to gather the user's data and display it in the result label. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to declare a string variable called name, and that's going to capture the name entered in the name text box. And we'll also capture the user's age. So this is very similar to before, but if you remember, when we were dealing with HTML controls, the property that we were accessing was called value. But now that we're using ASP.NET text boxes, the value or the property that we're accessing is called text. So there's a subtle difference to be aware of. Next, we need to get the nationality. So string nationality equals, now our nationality list control has various attributes. If we scroll down the list of attributes available, or properties I should say, well, we have selected index. That tells us the index of the item that was selected. There's the selected index changed event, well, we're going to have a look at that in the next lesson. There's the selected item. So this tells us which item was selected. Let's go for that. And then we can take that item and convert it into a string. Okay, so that's a method. So obviously I need the round brackets to call the method. Now then, I'm going to build up a formatted string containing the name, age, and nationality. So we'll have name as the first piece of information. This is quite similar to before. And then we'll have age as the next piece of information. Then we'll have nationality. And I'll just stop there. I'm not going to add in the programming languages just yet. You'll see why in a moment. So let's close the string there and then pass in the name string as the first piece of information, and the age string as the next piece, and the nationality as the final piece. Okay, very good. Now let's think about how we're going to determine whether the user can program in Visual Basic or C# or J#. Okay, so if you remember how we represented the language list, we didn't have separate checkbox controls for each item. We had a checkbox list which contained all the items. So what we need to do here is to write a loop which iterates through that checkbox list and determines whether each individual item in that collection is checked or unchecked. So I'm going to use for each loop in C#, and I'm going to declare a loop variable to represent each item in the collection. So we have a loop variable called item, which will point to each of the items in the languages list collection. And then in the loop, I'm just going to append some text to the result string on each iteration. So we'll use the string format function again, and we'll specify the name of the programming language. So that would be something like Visual Basic, and the value of it, whether it's currently selected or not, which means whether the user can program in that language. That's going to be the next piece of information. Okay. So to get the text for the current item, we use the text property. So that would be something like Visual Basic. And to determine whether that item is selected or not, then we can use the selected property on the item, like so. So that's going to iterate through the 3 checkboxes, and it will say something like Visual Basic equals true, Visual C# equals true, Visual J# equals false. So finally, we can assign the result to our result label. Okay, so that's it. Let's run it and see if it works. So on debug, we start without debugging. Okay, so this time I'm going to enter some different data. So I'll enter Emily. That's the name of our little girl. And Emily is, well, she was born in England, but we've adopted her as being Welsh. So we'll choose Wales as the nationality. Emily is 8, but she's going to be 9 in 10 days' time, she would tell you. And, well, Emily hasn't really started looking at Visual Basic or C# or J#, so we'll just go for C# as a sort of default option, and then we'll click submit, and hopefully this should all work fine. There we are. So it says the name is Emily, the age is 8, the nationality is Wales, Visual Basic is false, Visual C# is true, Visual J# is false. So that's all worked fine. That's marvellous. Okay, so let's close that window.